Varmt välkomna och ordet är ditt, Lizzie.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you very much. I will start by saying how happy we are for this cooperation with Kulturhuset Stadsteatern, and also very happy to be presenting the first program in the series J-Talks that will be held here, co-arranged by Kulturhuset Stadsteatern in cooperation with Judisk Kultur i Sverige. And to start this series, I mean, we couldn't have found a better occasion and better speakers. Our guest is an intellectual, a foremost writer, activist, and a great moral voice, Bernard-Henri Lévy. He doesn't need great introduction, but he was our guest. He was a Judisk Kultur's guest about 2.5 years ago, just a few weeks after the terror attacks at Charlie Hebdo and Hyper Cacher. And on that occasion, he spoke about Jews after Charlie. Tonight, it's a different topic, but I'm sure we will speak about a related topic to Jews after Charlie. And it's about his book, his very passionate and profound book, L'Esprit du Judaïsme, the genius of Judaism, perhaps one of his most personal books, that in which he it gives a deep look into Judaism, which has been, of course, the roots of a very important spiritual root for Bernard-Henri Lévy. So they will speak about it and about other things. Our moderator this evening is Per Svensson, writer and journalist. We've had the pleasure of working him earlier on several occasions. He's also the new political editor of Dagens Nyheter. So I am very pleased to welcome Bernard-Henri Lévy and Per Svensson. Bienvenue.
As Lisa said, we're going to speak about your new book, L'Esprit du Judaïsme, The Genius of Judaism. But I would start with you have, ever since you were a younger man, I would say, not a young man, a younger man, you have been traveling as a reporter, I would say, to war zones and hotspots all around the world. The first travels were for the magazine, Albert Camus magazine Combat. And since then you have traveled to Bosnia, Darfur, Libya, etc., etc. But the recent travels have been to Iraq, and especially you followed the Kurds of Iraq. So I would start there. What's the latest impressions you have brought back from Iraq and your contacts with the Kurds? I mean, it's a very complicated and dramatic situation.
Yes, thank you to start this way. I'm happy to start with that because my most recent impression, as you say, is big sorrow and big pain. I know the Kurds a little. I was there. I directed 2 movies, of which the Kurds, the Kurdish fighters, were the main characters. One movie was called Peshmerga. It was released 1.5 years ago in the Cannes Film Festival. I followed, it was a sort of road movie following on 1,000 kilometers the front line held by the Kurds against ISIS. And then I made a second movie, which was the epilogue, called The Battle of Mosul. And in these 2 movies, I did bear testimony for 2 things. Number one, that they were our rampart against ISIS. They did fight for all of us. They were the first one and for a long time the sole ones, the only ones to step in front of ISIS. And number 2, what I filmed is that they embody a sort of exception in the Muslim world. If there is an embodiment somewhere of what all Muslims dream of, which is an Islam matching with democracy, which is an Islam matching with human rights, which is an Islam embracing the principle of equality between men and women, it is in Kurdistan. They embody that, not perfectly, but more or less. They are, I show that in these two movies, they are welcoming to the minorities, to the other faith, to Judaism, to Christians, and so on. And a few weeks ago, they held a referendum. I was there again at their side. I was one of the international observers of this referendum. It was a fair vote, a sort of exemplary vote. It was not a declaration of independence. It was a sort of exercise of a constitutional right, which is to consult the Kurdish people about their wish on long term. It was supposed to be just a prologue to a dialogue with Iraq, and Iraq replied to that by a collective punishment, by a blockade of the country of Kurdistan. I stepped out of Kurdistan the last day of freedom of the country. I took the last flight out of Kurdistan. Since then, which is since 3 weeks, the country is completely like a jail in open air. And the West, and especially America, did not react, did not reply, and even probably America gave a sort of green light to Iraqi army, not only first of all to punish, blockade, all sort of sanctions, and to intervene militarily. The Brotherhood in Weapons, which has lasted since 2 years against ISIS, of which the Kurds were the vanguards, have turned into a fight in between the allies of yesterday of the Iraqis against the Kurds. A very unfair war, because the Iraqi army has very heavy weaponry. I filmed all of that, so I know it firsthand. They have American weaponry, they have Abrams tanks, they have very heavy things. The Kurds have nearly nothing. And this situation lasts since now 1 week. A few countries, including my country, expressed strong concern. But the main ally of the Kurds, who is the United States of America, did not decided not to take side. This is what the President of America said. I don't, as he said in Charlottesville, by the way, I don't take side. And we have today the shameful, pitiful, and so sad image of the best ally of the West being besieged, attacked, harmed by a coalition, by a gang of four, a new gang of four. There was a gang of four at the time of the Chinese Revolution. Now you have a new gang of four composed by Iraq, Turkey, Syria, and Iran. 4 countries who are, of course, partners, but who are not our best allies, who are not the best democracies in the world, who are not the best democracies in the area. So this gang of 4 is besieging and attacking one of the only democracies in the area with the tacit consent of the international community and of America. So that's why I am really concerned, in a big sorrow, and happy to start with that.
Yeah, and do you see any parallels? Because you also went to Bosnia in the 90s, and you made the film Bosnia. Do you see any parallels between the betrayal of the West betrayal of the Bosniaks, the Muslims in Bosnia, and what's happening to the Kurds? Could you see any similarities?
there is similarities, of course. One of the similarities is what I said about this conception, this embodiment of an enlightened Islam. Sarajevo was one example of this enlightened Islam. It was the proof that an enlightened Islam was possible, that the thesis of Samuel Huntington was false, that you could be a Muslim country and embrace the democratic values, exactly as the Kurds. And the similarity is that we, the West, did drop them flat, the Bosnian, as we do with the Kurds. What is different today, and which in a way is probably worse, is that when you analyze the whole story since a few months or a few weeks, there is you can have the feeling that most of the countries and of the democracies not only consented to the attack, to the beginning of bloodbath, but that they gave the green light. In Bosnia, we did not give the green light. We were shy, we were coward. It took us 4 years to intervene. I know that. I was in Sarajevo. I made a previous movie, as you say so gently, called Bosna, so I know the story. But at least the whole thing, the whole nasty and terrible thing happened out of our concern and consent. This time, there is a way in most of the supposed friendly capitals of the West, and especially America, a way to say, we are, number one, we are against this referendum. A way to say, if you insist to do this referendum, the consequences will be terrible. And number three, when the consequences arrive, to say, we just told it to you. You have what you deserve. You are punished by where you faltered and you sinned, which is really a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy by the West, which was not so crude and so evident in the Bosnian affair. So yes, I think that Sarajevo was a shame, Darfur was a shame, but what happened today is probably the summit of the shame. 4 days ago, I received some information which are public, which I published, and maybe it was translated here. The Iraqis did attack the brave, valiant Kurds with weapons furnished, provided by America, sold by America, in order to fight ISIS. So the same weapons which were provided in order to fight ISIS have been turned against the best fighter against ISIS ever, which were the Kurds. Because this is really the point. Again, and I saw that on the ground. In 2014, when the Iraqi army did escape in front of ISIS, when the whole world was mesmerized by the rise of ISIS, when the blast was so strong that nobody knew how to react, the only ones to build a physical rampart of earth and of flesh of their body were the Kurds. The Iraqi army abandoned their weapons, left the ground, and they were the only one to stand. And during 1 year and a half, they not only resisted, but they fight. So they probably avoided us, all of us, the world, the Muslim world, Europe, the West, the non-West, many terrorist attacks. They certainly did harm for all this time, the brain of the terror network. And the way we express our gratitude today is by leaving them in this terrible, heartbreaking loneliness, which is their fate today. And for me, this is really unbearable.
All your activities, you have been traveling to these places and engaged yourself in these conflicts for a long, long time. Is there a connection between these activities and your book, or rather the theme of your book, L'esprit de Judaïsme, the genius of Judaism? Have you a connection between your political activities and your definition of Judaism?
Thanks God, a man, even if contradictory, even if complex, is nevertheless a sort of a block. So, of course, there is a correspondence, a matching between what I do and what I say, between my creeds and my deeds, for sure. I try, but I don't even try. It happens like this. And it is true that this cohesion between my deeds and my creeds, which was lived life every day, but which was probably not, of which I did not make the theory between that. Maybe the theory of it is here. Yes, I think so. I think that this book expresses how my most intimate conviction feeds my most exotic and sometimes difficult to understand commitments. My difficult to understand commitments, for example, there is one which is very controversial, which is what I tried to do and what I did a few years ago during the Libyan war, during the war of liberation of Libya against dictatorship of Gaddafi. I embraced the cause of the democratic Libyans. I did it with all my heart, with all my energy, and this surprised at the time a few of my friends, and today there is a controversy about it. In this book I explained in a way why I did it, and why it did not come from it was not a step aside. It was not just a commitment to human rights, which is already a lot. Of course, commitment to human rights is a huge reason to do things. But in this book, I explain how it comes probably from a more hot metaphysical center of myself and of a few of my contemporaries. And this, when I say that, I mean all the part of this book which is devoted to a character of the Bible, which you all know, which is one of the most enigmatic characters, personnage of the Bible, which is the character of Jonah. Jonah, the prophet Jonah.
The one who got swallowed by the whale. Yeah.
Swallowed by the whale because he refuses to do what he is committed and ordered to do, which is to go, by the way, to Nineveh at this time, which is today Mosul. Jonah is a Jewish guy called a prophet now, who was asked by God, let's say, to go to the grand city. The grand city. The grand city is the city of sin, the city of incarnated evil, the city which he knows by intimate knowledge, sure knowledge, that it is and it will be the enemy of his own people. And what is asked to him is to go to the great city and to try to help her to save itself. And he's swallowed by the whale because he thinks that this is a stupid order. He thinks that it makes no sense. He thinks that it will be immoral without morality, that if he has to choose between his people and the great city of sin, of course he chooses his people, and he escapes. And the story of the book of Jonah is a story of a man who escapes this commitment to go to the most other of all the others. And it tells the story of how he is nevertheless driven back to the city, the great city of the sin. And for me, this little book, this book is a reflection about around the Bible, the Talmud, what it means to be a Jew, what is the beating heart of the Jewish identity. And for me, this book of Jonah is probably one of the most enigmatic, as I said, one of the most mysterious, but one of the most essential books regarding this experience to be a Jew, if it is not only an identity, but an alterity. If you are, the book of Jonah is the guideline, is the book which can guide anyone, and especially a Jew, in this universalist way of considering the values expressed in the Bible and so on. So, for this reason, because the book is, by a big part, a meditation on this book about this book of Jonah, because it is a meditation about the fact that being a Jew does not consist in dealing with other Jews, but with non-Jews. Because this book is a book where I try to express that messianism consists in dealing with the nations, as the Bible says. Because of that, I think that for myself, it is probably one of the keys, if not the key, of what I did in Libya, for example, but of what I did when I was a very young man, even younger than now, in Bangladesh in the early 70s, and other experience of this sort. Yes.
Because in Libya, as Jonah, he has to talk to his enemies and actually save them. And I know that in Libya you had a long conversation with the most radical Islamists, the ones that you know would hate you because your Jewish origin, and would actually. And why did you do that? Why did you spend a whole night with talking to these people? So why did you do that?
For that, the story is, when I think about it from far now, 6 years after, the story sounds at my own ears as rather crazy. No, it is true. It was in August 2011. I had been in Libya for 6 months, back and forth. I had tried to and help to convince some people in France to involve themselves. I did a lot of things. I went to see the Prime Minister of Israel. This is I made a film about this. When you see that, Benjamin Netanyahu, to convince him to extend a brotherly hand to these people rebelling against dictatorship and trying to embrace democracy, which the Prime Minister of Israel did. He released a good communiqué. I don't say always good of the Prime Minister of Israel, but this time he did it. he addressed a sort of welcoming in the club of the Friends of Liberty to his Arab neighbors of Libya. I did a lot of things. I was on the ground. I filmed the fighters. I filmed the Democrats. I filmed the women revolting against, and so on. And at the end of the process, in August, just before the final liberation of Tripoli, one of my friends, with whom I had been on the battlefield of Ajdabia, told me, "You saw everyone. You saw Democrats, less Democrats. You saw Muslim. You saw non-believers, and so. There is one sort of people whom you did not see." I said, "Which one?" He told me, "The revolutionaries." I said, "What do you say? I see a revolution. 6 months, since 6 months, I only see." No. He said, "Revolutionaries is very special. It is the blah, blah, blah." Actually, it was the Al-Qaeda people in Libya. There was a small wing of Al-Qaeda located in the city of Derna, small, which has been expelled since a few years from Libya, as ISIS has been expelled from Libya, which is not so well known by the Libyans themselves 2 years ago. But at this time, they were vivid and vibrant and trying to take advantage, of course, of this movement. And I said, "Okay, let's go. Of course, I have to get the whole picture. Let's go." So I was taken at night. All this is in the movie The Oath of Tobruk. I was taken at night. It was at the end of the Ramadan. They blinded my eyes for the last half an hour of the travel to a remote farm. I was alone with a cameraman and with one bodyguard. I arrived in a farm surrounded by pickups and so on, and I arrived in a room where there was the 4 guys. For those who know a little the area, the Salabi, the family, Mr. Salabi, brothers. 3 guys who were really not the good guys at all. And my bodyguard was armed. He had to let his arm outside. And we began the strangest conversation of my life. I began to say, my first question was, "Do you know I'm Jewish?" They burst of laughing. I said, "Why do you laugh?" They said, "Of course we know. It is, you are every day they say it every day on the Gaddafi TV, that you are a Jew, that you are a Zionist agent. Your head, there is even a price on your head." There was at this time $5.8 million on my head in this July 2011. So we know that, of course. Next question. He said, "Okay." And then we began a very strange conversation about anti-Semitism, about women. I asked them, I remember this is in the film and in the book, if it was possible for them, conceivable to marry a Jewish girl. And they made an aparté. They made a sort of interruption of meeting to concert themselves. And they say, "Yes, it's possible if she is not the first one. If she is the third one." Okay, this sort of conversation. But also a more deeper conversation about the Islam and Islamism, about the West and the Arabic world, and so on and so on. It lasted all night. And when I went back to Benghazi at dawn, I wondered, why did I take this risk? And I did it for 3 reasons. Probably to have the whole picture, but I'm not a journalist. At the end of the day, I don't care so much about the whole picture. Number 2, because, for 2 reasons, let's say. Number 2, because I thought that it was important, that it made sense for me, for who I am, for the writer I am, for the French I am, and for the Jew I am, to go close to not only to the other this no to the enemy, and not for curiosity, not for exotism, not even to convince him. But I knew, and this is what happened, I knew that in the fight, in the movement of this conversation, something will happen. Not in me, but in them. And it happened. They started the conversation with the belief, they were convinced of that I was a devil, agent of Israel, involved in Libya for obscure plot conspiracy reasons. They ended the night with a sort of disorder in their radar, in their vision of the world. Suddenly, all of this were shaken, and they understood. I think these the three brothers and another man, I would not say that they were convinced, but the idea came to their mind that you could be a Frenchman and a Jew, and having the sincere wish, without any interest, without any conspiracy behind, to help a Muslim people, to help an Arab crowd to liberate itself from a dictatorship, and to knock at the door, at least, of humanity and liberty, without any interest, without any vested commitment, for nothing than honor, values, and faithfulness to one creed which I have, which is the universality of human rights, and which is that human rights, democracy are not a speciality of Europe and of the West, but is something which can be applied anywhere. And when I went back to Benghazi, I thought, only for that, only for this moment when I saw in the eyes of these four men that suddenly their vision of the world did not work, that it was possible to be what they call a Zionist, and to be sincerely wishing, and to take a personal risk, intellectual at least, but not only, sincerely wishing to see an Arab crowd breaking the unwritten law according to which this part of the world is damned and cursed by dictatorship. Only for that, I was happy to have done it.
On I think it's page 413 of this book, you're stating l'esprit de judaïsme, c'est le livre, the genius of Judaism is the book and the books. And the book with a capital B, is that the Torah, or have I misunderstood? Is it?
The book is not the Torah. The Torah is not, does not belong to the Jews. The Torah is studied by the Jews, by the Christians, and normally by the Muslims, and by a lot of them actually. The real book of the Jews is the Talmud. What makes the Jews being Jews is the commitment and the faithfulness and the study of the Talmud. I really believe that. You have some Jews who believe that the core of Judaism is Torah. It is not an heresy, because in Judaism you don't have heresy, but it is really a sectarian group in Judaism, which is called the Karaite. They believe that only the Torah values. But for me, and I think for all the great Jews of the tradition to whom I try to be faithful, the beating heart of the Judaism, of the study, is the Talmud. There is a great quote of my master Emmanuel Levinas, who thought that the core of Judaism was the Talmud, and he said that the Talmud is the unfolding of the wings of the spirit. There is the spirit which is folded inside the Torah, and the unfolding of the wings of the angels of the words is the Talmud. So this is the book for me. It's a huge book, a book which you sometimes don't have the time to read in a whole life. I had a great friend, one of my best friends and one of the men, of the human beings I admired most, who was called Lévy, a great gentleman, who was a former Maoist in the 60s, who was the secretary of Jean-Paul Sartre, and who turned to Judaism and to the most vibrant Judaism when he was 35 or 40. He died early, 15 years ago, before finishing his reading of Talmud. So this is the book. It's a book which you spend a life to read sometimes. Sometimes you have the chance to read it twice. So what I say, and there is a big question. My friend Lévy, for example, this was a discussion we had when he was alive. We built together a sort of institute of studies in Jerusalem, and he was the most learned French philosopher I could know. He read Plato, Heidegger, Husserl, literature, Proust, whatever. And at the end of his life, he pretended that the faithfulness to the book supposed to forget the books. I believe the opposite. I believe that the best way to read the book is to read it in parallel with the books, to provoke some sparks between the two. And I believe that the biggest miracle for a Jew, not an intellectual, not a writer, just a simple Jew, studying on a Saturday morning, is when a great book of philosophy or a great book of literature enters fuses with a verse of the Torah or a page of the Talmud. And I don't believe that myself only. I really believe that from Maimonides and Rashi till the great wise man of Vilnius, this was the principle. This was the law. This was the fact. The greatness of these people is that they were the most learned in profane sciences and culture, and the most devoted studiers of Talmud. And for me, it is both. It is both. Both things have to work together. And it is what Emmanuel Levinas, which I already quoted, said. Emmanuel Levinas used to say, and this is what he did, that the task of his life was to inject in the Hebrew language some accents, some vibrancies of the Greek rhetoric, and to inject in the Greek language some sounds coming from the Hebrew. It has nothing to do with proper sounds. It meant, of course, to make here in the Jewish philosophy some echoes coming from the profane philosophy, and to make here in the comments which he did about Heidegger, Husserl of Plato, some elements which could not have been introduced if he was not familiar to the Talmud. And for me, for a philosopher, this is the consequence in a philosophical life of this universalism of Judaism, of which I was telling you about, in the political ground. In the political ground, it means Jonas. In the philosophical ground, it means Greek and Jew, Jew and Greek, echoing each in the field of the other.
You mentioned, I would like to return to Benny Lévy and the Talmud and this pattern that you, but you mentioned the name Rashid, who was, I have learned from your book, a very learned man studying the Talmud in France, and he was also a cultivator of wine in Champagne, an expert on Champagne. And it's an interesting part of your book where you have a very interesting argument about Jewish culture not being existing parallel to or beside French culture, but actually creating French culture. And this man Rashid, you can describe that he was, according to you, one of the inventors of the modern French language. Absolutely. Because of his commentary of the Talmud. That's a very interesting and a rather new angle, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it's a little chapter of the book devoted to France, where I try to say, because there is in this time there was the Prime Minister of France, who is named Manuel Valls, said one quote after Hypercacher, I think, of which Lizzie was telling. He said, "France without Jews would not be France." He said that in support to Jews. He had this great quote, great sentence, France without Jews would not be France. So I wondered, but what does he mean at the end of the day? And I tried to, the book was nearly finished. This was already the book, but it helped me to emphasize it. I tried to see exactly what France owes to this Jewish component of itself. And Jewish thinking, Jews in France are among the big builders, developers, as you say in Detroit, developers of French identity. And one of the things which Jews developed is the French language through Rashi. Rashi is the greatest Talmudist of all countries, a master of Talmud. Talmud, one page is Rashi, as you know. But he was also the first one writing in Hebrew characters the sound of the words of the French of his time, of the beginning of the modern period. Before any novel, before Roman de l'Or, the first memory, the memorial in which are embedded and in which begin to work and to functionate the first words of the French language are these undecipherable pages of Rashi, who talk, as any great Jewish text, who talk these pages about sacred things, about the sky, the angels, God, whatever, but who talk about very practical things. Agriculture, wine, a divorce, a quarrel between neighbors, and so on. This is Talmud. Talmud deals with the highest requirement of the spirit and with the most pragmatic and practical acts of the daily life. And at the time where the Christian monks wrote also in a strange language, which was the Latin. But they wrote about immortality of the soul. They wrote about the link between the body and the soul. They wrote about the proofs of the existence of God. And they did not write about wine, about careers, about housing, about developing of a village. Rashi was the only one. The Jews were the only one, and the only one who wrote a text which remained for centuries and centuries is Rashi. So you have the few thousands of the glossary of this first French language, beginning its mechanism is engraved, it's memorialized, is archived in the work of Rashi. If we still have the sound of the first French and the way in which it began to produce the modern French, it is due to Rashi.
That's very fascinating. I returned to Benny Lévy. As you said, he was a Maoist as a young man, and then he became this learned in Talmud and so forth. And he was also a man who is said to have made Sartre realize that Sartre had been wrong. So Sartre changed his minds about certain things when he grew old, maybe thanks to the influence of Benny Lévy. And I wonder, one could say, reading this book, you get the impression that this reading and rereading of texts in Judaism could work as an antidote against totalitarian thinking and totalitarian ideologies. So I would ask you, you were known in the 70s as one of the new philosophers, and you got famous for your criticism of Marxism, of totalitarian thinking. Do you think that your background, your family, your origin in a Jewish family or a Jewish tradition had something to do with the fact that you became a new philosopher, so to speak? That's a long and complicated question, but the answer is, the essence is, could Judaism work as an antidote against totalitarian ideologies?
Not at this time, because at this time I was hardly Jew. I was Jew by, and I tell that in the book, that this is not private, it is public in a way. Till 30 years old, I belonged to this category of European Jews. A lot of people were like me and still are like me. I knew I was a Jew. I was not ashamed of it at all, but I did not know anything else about what to be a Jew meant. Till the age of 30, I never opened a Torah. I never entered in a synagogue. I had not the slightest idea of what it could mean to be a Jew because of my family. My father was what is called in France a free French. He was a Gaullist, follower of General de Gaulle. He was first of all a fighter in Spanish Civil War in 1938, at the end of the Spanish Civil War. He was a young communist involved in the international brigades. Then he was entered in the Free French Army of Africa. He was in the Battle of Monte Cassino, decorated for that, and so on and so on. And he went out of the war. I was born in 1948 with the conviction that he had to forget about this Jewish background, which he thought harmed him, his relatives, and his friends so much. And I was bred in this idea that Judaism was an old story embedded in old books with a lot of dust, and that they had to be left to the dust. I was bred in this idea. Benny Lévy, the secretary of Sartre, was bred in the same idea. We were universalists. He was the chief of the Maoist movement. I was only a little follower. But we were Maoist, both of us, and we wanted to know nothing about the Judaism, the Jewish story. And what happened is that at the same time, by different roads, because he was a secretary of Sartre was blind, physically blind. He could not read. And he asked Benny Lévy new books. And he heard in his youth, Jean-Paul Sartre, about this Emmanuel Levinas, who was his age. He wanted to know at the end of his life, what is at the end of the day this Levinas. And me, for other reasons, I went to Levinas also. And in the same year, very strangely, this was 1978, 1979, you had a few Jewish guys like him and like me and like many others, discovering, number one, that you could be a universalist, you can believe in universal brotherhood, in human rights, in revolution at this time, and being a Jew, and moreover, that the best way to believe in universal values was probably to be a Jew. That there was not, that to be a Jew was not a way to overshadow this requirement of universality, but a way oppositely, to think it more thoroughly. So, from my family, I had a lot of things. I got a lot of lessons. And first of all, my commitment to anti-fascism, my intolerance to any smell of ultra-right and all of that. And I know by heritage, I recognize the smell from far. But the idea that you have in Judaism a way to universalism, an antidote to intolerance, the idea that in the way of studying on and on, again and again, the same verse and paragraph, you have a way to turn back to fanaticism. This I had to discover by myself. And I remember how my father was, my parents, they were even shocked, because this is the story of the European Jews. They really bred me in the idea that I was a son of Racine and Ibsen, you know, and certainly not. And when I came back home in the weekends with the idea that there was Racine, there was Ibsen, there was Corneille, but there was also Rachi, for them it was a disaster. Such a long way forward. The greatest schools of the Republic, to go back to what appeared to them as a sort of obscurantism, it took me some time to convince them that it was certainly not a way back to obscurantism, but it was a step forward in the fight against obscurantism. But this I had to tell them, to tell it to them.
And now you have taken lessons in Hebrew, I guess, in New York.
I took not enough, no, but I tried and I did, yeah, in New York.
I have to touch on anti-Semitism, because you have a very long chapter on anti-Semitism in the beginning of the book, where you describes in a very interesting way how anti-Semitism has a capacity of always finding new clothes when the old ones are worn out, so to speak. The Christian anti-Semitism replaced by the fantasies of the almighty plutocratic Jew, and after that the biological racist anti-Semitism, and when that one is compromised for God, you have this the modern version, which according to you is the obsession with Israel. so to speak. But you also said that that these old worn-out forms of anti-Semitism won't come back. That there will not be another 30s.
Sorry?
That we won't return to the 30s. That this once discarded and worn-out versions of anti-Semitism has been placed on the will never return, so to speak. That we have these new ones, always a new version of anti-Semitism. And
yes, I try to demonstrate that it is always a new version, and I try to demonstrate what is the version of today. Not only Israel, the three pillars of a possible anti-Semitism today, of a possible mass anti-Semitism, the three pillars are obsession of Israel, yes, denial of Holocaust, and competition of victims. An anti-Semite today has a chance to convince a lot of people if he can say that Jews are such a wicked and evil people that they can embrace a fascist state, an illegitimate state, which is Israel, by overstressing, exaggerating, or inventing their own martyrdom, denial of Holocaust, and by doing so, overshadowing other miseries, other outrages, and other slaughterings. An anti-Semite today is somebody who tries and who sometimes achieves. Of course, in France, we have a lot of examples. In America, we have a lot of examples of people who feed the new anti-Semitism by convincing people of these three propositions. And this is the new pattern. It is not. You have still some people who believe, who try to say that Jews are a special race, but this does not work any longer. But this rhetoric works, can work in big parts of the world, in parts of the Arabic world, in Europe, and in America, on the right and on the left, both sides, with the same rhetoric and the same words. What I say also, and I'm happy that you stress that, I think, nevertheless, that we are not in the 30s. And I not because I'm an optimist, I am energetic, but I'm not stupidly optimist. But I think that in Europe, I have the duty, we have the duty to fight against anti-Semitism, but they are not so strong. They are on the defense. They don't have any great voices. In Western Europe and in Eastern Europe, they don't have the positions they had in the 30s at the heart of the state. In my country, for example, in France, in 1936, which was the year of the Popular Front, the victory of the left, 1936, great day, the great moment of progress. In the National Assembly, you had the vote for the president of the assembly, the man who, the moderator of the debate. Very important seat, symbolically and politically. And you had two candidates in 1936. One was called Édouard Herriot. He finally won. He was a great man, great politician, an artist of politics, I would say. And the other one was called Xavier Vallat. The name does not ring such a bell, I'm sure, but it will ring a bell when I say the following. 4 years after, he will be appointed by the Nazi regime as commissaire for the Jewish affairs in Paris. So he was the most enraged, infuriated, anti-Semite French of this time. But he was already that. In 1936, he was the challenger of the wise artist of politics, Édouard Herriot. Édouard Herriot won, but he won for a short head. There was maybe 240 votes for Herriot. I don't have the figures in head now, and maybe 160 for the anti-Semitic. So France was a country where, in the assembly of the Popular Front, you could have 1/3, let's say, of the assembly able to embrace and endorse anti-Semitic, very strong position. This is inconceivable today. Inconceivable in France, inconceivable in most of the countries of Europe, even if we have very bad signs and omens, as we have since a few weeks in Germany, for example.
And Hungary? The campaign against
Hungary,
Soros in Hungary?
Hungary, there is a, yes. But I believe, nevertheless, and I think I demonstrate that the fight is hard, that the vigilance has to be at every moment, of course. In France, there is some people who have been killed by anti-Semitism, even recently. A decent lady called Mrs. Halimi, who was killed because she was a Jew. But nevertheless, for a lot of reasons which I explained there, anti-Semitism is not on the crest of the wave now in Europe. It is in a defensive position if we don't put the weapons down.
Time flies when one has interesting conversations, but I will ask a question, and you have the right to get angry with me, because it's a question that you could spend the rest of the night answering it, and one of your children put it to you in the book, but I have to put it to you. Do you believe in God?
I will make you the reply which I made to my child. Not a child any longer, but the reply is that this is not the question. I really believe that one thing which characterizes a Jew, what it means to be a Jew, is precisely that the question of God is not the primary question. In the book of Maimonides, for example, the word God, the question of God, and the question of the belief or not in God arrives, as I say in details, very late in the book of Maimonides. And what I think from all the masters, some believe, some don't believe, some believe sometimes and not, is that what is required from a Jew is not to believe, but to study. Is not to have faith, but to try to understand the world. If you read Talmud, which is, as I said before, the vibrant heart of Judaism, the question of God is not so present. You have pages and pages dealing with so many other questions, matters, concerns of mankind which have nothing to do with God. And when the question of God arrives, it arrives in interminable, unfinishable discussions, conversations, all the opposite of what you have in mind where you evoke this question of the belief or not belief in God. And what I believe deeply is that this is probably one of the main differences between Judaism and Christianism. Both have their greatness. Both have their way of access to the beauty of the world. But they are different. And everything is not in everything. You know, nothing is more stupid than the lazy ecumenism. To be a Jew and to be Christian, you may be, and you are today. We are brothers since Vatican II, since 60 years. There is a brotherhood which is new and which is one of the best news of the 20th century. But brothers does not mean the same. And one of the difference is that one of the greatness of the Christianity is this idea of the communion with the embracement of the bet on the existence of God. This jump. There is always a moment in a great Christian mind, and especially in those which I know a little, who are the great writers of the Christian tradition, when they make the jump. The jump to, they cross the mystery, they go beyond the night of doubt and unbelieveness, and they decide to believe despite of this and that. This gesture, this attitude is completely remote from the Jewish spirit and way of conceiving the being of the world. This idea of a jump into belief, this idea of jumping in the emptiness, which is great, but which consists in making the economy of the innumerable steps and backwards and complexities and pockets of darkness. This is absolutely inconceivable for a Jew. And what you see in the labyrinth of the Talmud is this commitment to cross, to lose oneself, and sometimes to go out to light and to go back in the semi-darkness of the letters, of the dead end sometimes, of the mystery of the study, without any belief. And most of the masters of Talmud say that to the worshippers. What I ask you is not to cross all these steps, to economize, but to go deep inside and to try to understand. And there is a great master of Judaism who was called the Gaon, the Gaon of Vilnius, one of the biggest spirits of the 19th century. One of the most revered rabbis, not just a rabbi, the equivalent of Rashi or Maimonides in modern times. And one time he was asked that. He was a believer, but he was asked, Master, what do you prefer? A lazy pupil who believes, or a great student who comes every day to the yeshiva, who comes in the obscurity of the text, who burns his life, who commits his body and soul to try to disintricate the folded meaning, but who doubts? What do you prefer? And the Gaon of Vilnius is said to have not hesitated 1 minute, 1 second, and to have said, I prefer not to have the choice, but if I have to choose, I prefer the one who doubts and even does not believe, but who burns his life, who commits his body and soul to the study of the mystery of the world, better than the lazy one who is just happy in believing. And this, I think, is the real, what makes special for the best, or not the best, of Judaism.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.